I watched my grandfather die with his Purple Heart clutched in his trembling fist, whispering words that would haunt me forever. Firebase Echo wasn't attacked, Tommy. We burned it ourselves. The morphine should have silenced him by then, but his eyes burned with a clarity that terrified me. Outside his hospice window, the November rain hammered against the glass like artillery shells, and I could hear the distant rumble of traffic on I-95, but all I could focus on were those words. My grandfather, Colonel James Mitchell, the hero. Of Firebase Echo, the man whose Bronze Star sat in our family's place of honor, was confessing to something that made no sense. Grandpa, you're not making sense, I said, gripping his shoulder. The NVA attacked. You saved 37 men. It's in all the records. His laugh was a death rattle. Records lie, boy. I should know. I wrote half of them. Then he was gone, leaving me alone with a secret that felt like swallowing glass. I'm a military historian at Georgetown, specializing in Vietnam-era operations. I've spent 15 years studying classified documents, interviewing veterans, piecing together this truth behind sanitized official narratives. But nothing had prepared me for investigating my own family's legacy. The first thing I did was pull everything I could find on Firebase Echo. The official story was pristine. March 15, 1968, a remote fire support base near the DMZ came under massive NVA assault. My grandfather, then a young captain, organized the defense and evacuation, saving most of his unit before calling in napalm strikes on their own position to deny it to the enemy. A textbook example of heroic sacrifice. But as I dug deeper, the cracks began to show. Firebase Echo's casualty reports didn't match the commendation narratives. The timeline of the evacuation had inconsistencies. Most troubling, several survivors. I tracked down, went silent the moment I mentioned my grandfather's name. One old sergeant in Michigan hung up on me 3 times before finally agreeing to meet. Your granddad was a good man, Sergeant Willis told me in a Detroit diner, his hands shaking as he stirred his coffee. But what happened at Echo? That wasn't war, son. That was something else entirely. What do you mean? Willis looked around the empty diner, then leaned forward. You ever hear of Project Phoenix? I had. Phoenix was the CIA's controversial assassination program targeting Viet Cong infrastructure. But what did that have to do with Firebase Echo? Echo wasn't just a fire support base, Willis whispered. It was a processing center. We weren't fighting the war there. We were changing it. He stood to leave, then paused. Your grandfather saved our lives by burning that place down, but not from the enemy. That night, I contacted an old friend at the National Archives. Dr. Sarachan had helped me access classified materials before, but when I mentioned Firebase Echo, her usual warmth evaporated. Tommy, some stones are better left unturned. Sarah, my grandfather is dead. Whatever happened there, it can't hurt him now. She was quiet for a long time. Give me 48 hours. Those 2 days crawled by like months. I couldn't focus on my teaching, couldn't sleep, couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to uncover something that would change everything I thought I knew about my family, about the war, about the country. I'd spent my life studying Sarah called at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday. Meet me at the archives, section K7. Come alone. The National Archives at night feels like a mausoleum of secrets. Sarah led me through restricted corridors I'd never seen, past rooms full of documents that would never see public light. In K-7, she pulled out a single manila folder, unmarked except for a serial number. This doesn't exist, she said. If anyone asks, we never met. Inside were photographs, reports, and testimonies that made my blood freeze. Firebase Echo wasn't just a forward operating base. It was a black site, a place where suspected Viet Cong prisoners were taken for enhanced interrogation. The photos showed concrete cells, medical equipment, men in white coats standing next to Vietnamese prisoners. But the worst part was the final document, a handwritten report in my grandfather's unmistakable script. Subject response to experimental compounds exceeded expectations. Recommend immediate expansion of program. However, security may be compromised. Preparing contingency for site destruction. I read it 3 times before the words sank in. My grandfather wasn't the hero who saved Firebase. Echo, he was the man who destroyed it to cover up war crimes. But there was more. The last page contained a roster of personnel at Firebase Echo during its final weeks. Scientists from Fort Detrick, CIA operatives. And at the bottom, a note in my grandfather's handwriting. Project terminated due to international law violations. All evidence must be destroyed. No witnesses. I drove home in a daze, the folder, burning like napalm in my passenger seat. Everything I thought I knew about my family was crumbling. A bronze star, the Purple Heart, the stories of heroism, all of it, built on a foundation of torture and murder. But I couldn't stop digging. Over the next month, I tracked down more survivors, used my academic credentials to access restricted military personnel files, even hired a private investigator to locate families of missing Vietnamese civilians from that region. The picture that emerged was horrifying. Firebase Echo had been a testing ground for biological and chemical weapons, using Vietnamese prisoners as subjects. When word of the operation reached Washington and threatened to become an international incident, my grandfather was ordered to destroy all evidence. The NVA attack was fabricated. My grandfather had ordered his own men to burn the base, executed the remaining prisoners, and filed false reports, claiming enemy action. The 37 men he saved weren't rescued from enemy fire. They were. The only personnel who weren't involved in the experiments and could be trusted to keep quiet. Was preparing to publish my findings when I received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Michael Crenshaw from the Department of Defense knocked on my apartment door on a rainy Thursday evening. He was younger than I expected, with a kind of bland face that disappears in crowds. Professor Mitchell, I understand you've been researching Firebase Echo. It's public record, I lied. He smiled. Actually, it's not. May I come in? He didn't wait for an answer. Your grandfather was a patriot, Crenshaw said, settling into my armchair like he owned it. What happened at Echo was necessary. The intelligence gathered their saved American lives. By torturing civilians? By any means necessary. His voice didn't change. The war was unpopular at home. We needed every advantage we could get, so you covered it up. We protected the men who served their country. He stood. Just as we're prepared to protect your grandfather's reputation now. The threat was clear. Publish the truth about Firebase Echo, and my career would be destroyed. My grandfather's military benefits would be revoked posthumously. The family would be financially ruined and publicly disgraced. What if I don't care about the consequences? Crenshaw smiled again. Everyone cares about consequences, Professor. The question is whether you care more about the truth or about your nephew Kevin's acceptance to West Point. My blood turned to ice. Kevin was my sister's son, following in the family military tradition. He'd worked for years to earn his appointment to the military academy. You bastard. I'm a patriot, Crenshaw corrected. Just like your grandfather. After he left, I sat in my apartment for hours, staring at the evidence I'd collected. The photos of tortured prisoners, the testimonies of survivors, the proof that one of America's most decorated Vietnam veterans was actually a war criminal. But I also thought about Kevin, about my sister who'd sacrificed everything to give her son opportunities she never had, about the other families of Echo survivors who'd built their lives on their fathers' and husbands' supposed heroism. The truth would destroy more than just my grandfather's reputation. I made my choice. The next morning, I drove to the Potomac River. The water was dark and cold, perfect for swallowing secrets. I stood on the riverbank, holding the manila folder that contained enough evidence to rewrite Vietnam War history. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I wondered if you'd do it. I turned to find Sarah Chun walking toward me, but she looked different. Somehow, harder, more dangerous. Sarah, how did you... I've been watching you since you started digging into Echo. She stopped a few feet away. The question is what you're going to do with what you found. I'm destroying it. The truth would hurt too many innocent people. She nodded approvingly. That's what we hoped you'd say. The use of we sent alarm bells ringing in my head. What are you talking about? Sarah's smile was nothing like the warm expression I'd known for years. Did you really think it was a coincidence that I had access to those files? Had I just happened to be able to get you into Section K7? The folder slipped from my numb fingers, scattering photographs and documents along the riverbank. You set me up. We needed to know if you'd be a problem. Your grandfather's deathbed confession worried some people in Washington. They wanted to see how far you'd push before you accepted the official narrative. Who's they? The same people who've been managing this story for 55 years. Sarah pulled out her phone. Crenshaw wasn't lying about protecting your grandfather's reputation, or about the consequences of digging too deep. I bent to gather the scattered documents, my hands shaking with rage and betrayal. So none of it was real? Our friendship, your help with my research? Oh, it was real, Sarah said. I genuinely like you, Tommy. That's why I'm glad you made the right choice. As I stuffed the papers back into the folder, one photograph caught my eye. It was different from the others, older, more formal. A group photo of military personnel and civilians standing in front of a sign that read, Firebase Echo, Experimental Station Alpha. But it was the caption at the bottom that made my world collapse. Firebase Echo Personnel, February 1968. Project. Lead, Dr. Sarah Chun, Fort Detrick Biological Warfare Division. I looked up at Sarah, who was watching me with something that might have been pity. You're older than you look, I said quietly. 68, actually. Same age as your grandfather when he died. She glanced at the photograph in my hands. We worked together at Echo. I was the one running the experiments. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. You've been watching our family for decades. Monitoring, yes, making sure the story stayed buried. Your grandfather never broke, even at the end. Well, almost never. That's why you were so eager to help me access classified materials. You wanted to control what I found. Sarah nodded. Better to give you a carefully curated version of the truth than let you stumble onto the real story. Which is? She was quiet for a long moment, watching the dark water flow past us. Your grandfather wasn't the monster you think he was, Tommy. He was a young officer following orders from people like me. When he realized what we were really doing at Echo, when he saw what our experiments were doing to those prisoners, he tried to stop it. The report I found, a forgery. We needed a scapegoat for the operation, someone whose conscience wouldn't let him expose what really happened. Sarah's voice was almost gentle now. Your grandfather destroyed Firebase Echo to save those prisoners, not to cover up war crimes. The men who died in that fire were my colleagues, the ones who refused to evacuate when he warned them. I stared at her, unable to process what she was telling me. Then why let me think he was a war criminal? Because the truth is worse. Sarah stepped closer. Firebase Echo wasn't just about biological weapons. We were developing something that could change human behavior, eliminate the capacity for moral resistance. If that technology had been perfected... She didn't need to finish. A weapon that could strip away conscience, turn anyone into a willing participant in atrocity would have made every subsequent American conflict a genocide. Your grandfather saved more than just 37 soldiers, Sarah continued. He saved the soul of the American military. The folder in my hands felt impossibly heavy. So he really was a hero. The best kind. The kind who sacrifices his own reputation to do what's right. Sarah turned to leave, then paused. The offer to forget all this still stands, Tommy. You can walk away. Let your grandfather's official story remain intact. Your family keeps their honor. Kevin gets his appointment to West Point, and the world never learns about Firebase Echo. And if I don't? Her smile was sad. Then you'll spend the rest of your life knowing that your grandfather died, believing his own family thought he was a monster. She disappeared into the darkness between the trees, leaving me alone with the truth and a choice that would define. The rest of my life, I stood there until dawn, watching the Potomac carry away leaves and debris from the storm. A folder remained in my hands, its contents now taking on an entirely different meaning. Every document I'd read, every photograph I'd analyzed, every testimony I'd collected, all of it looked different through the lens of Sarah's revelation. My grandfather had been a hero after all. But not in the way the official records claimed. In the end, I walked back to my car and drove home. The folder went into my safe, where it remains today. Kevin graduated from West Point with honors and now serves as a lieutenant in the Army Corps of Engineers. My sister never learned that her father-in-law's reputation hung by a thread for a few terrifying weeks. But every Veterans Day, when I visit my grandfather's grave, I leave 2 medals instead of 1. The official Bronze Star that the government awarded him for his supposed heroism at Firebase Echo, and an unmarked silver medal I had made privately. My own recognition for the courage it takes to destroy everything you've worked for in order to save lives no one will ever know you saved. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones whose real stories can never be told. And sometimes the most patriotic act is making sure they never are. Asterisk.